You're watching Study with Sudhir. This is your digital classroom. My name is Sudhir. We are looking at the short story, The Singing Lesson, written by Katherine Mansfield from New Zealand. And this is part of the Echoes textbook, which is part of the ISC English Literature Class 12 syllabus. We'll be doing it in two parts because there are a lot of themes which you need to understand it very well. So I don't want to make a bulky 60 minutes plus kind of a video. So we'll divide it into two parts so as to do justice to this story. We'll be going through half of the story in the first part. The second part will finish the story and talk about the themes which you need to know in order to be able to write your answers very well, especially if you're attempting a long answer. As far as this story is concerned, it lends itself to a long answer provided you understand the themes very well. And also we'll be going through each and every word in the story so that you can understand the story very well and understand the nuances that Katherine Mansfield has tried to bring out as far as this story is concerned. With despair, cold, sharp despair. So notice the words that have been used right at the beginning of the story. Buried deep in her heart like a wicked knife, Miss Meadows, in a cap and gown and carrying a little baton, trod the cold corridors that led to the music hall. The first sentence, if you notice, is very hard-hitting, sharp, almost blunt, right? Let's just look at specific words. It starts with the word despair, conveying sadness, conveying agony, conveying a sense of unhappiness. And it is a sad word that has been then compared to a wicked knife. So please underline these words and you would do well to use these words in your answers in order to embellish your answers better. Baton is something which you would find carried by policemen in general, like a small stick kind of a thing. And it is representative. Now baton also in a baton relay race, it's kind of you pass on the baton to the next runner, to the next athlete in order to kind of win the race, the 4 into 100 meters or 4 into 400 meters race. So it's also in a sense, because we are seeing it in a school context, it's also in a sense representative of passing off of knowledge to the younger children. Girls of all ages, rosy from the air and bubbling over with that gleeful excitement that comes from running to school on a fine autumn morning, hurried, skipped, fluttered by. From the hollow classrooms came a quick drumming of voices. Now, if you see here, the kind of words that have been used for the young girl students at that school, hurried, skipped, fluttered by, it conveys a sense of energy. And that's in sharp contrast to what Miss Meadows, who is a teacher there, a music teacher, what she is actually feeling. So the contrast is very sharp, again something which you need to make a note of. Gleeful excitement. Look at the kind of adjectives or phrases which have been used in order to describe the girls out there. Bubbling over with that gleeful excitement. A bell rang, a voice like a bird cried, Muriel. Right now, and then there came from the staircase a tremendous knocking. Someone had dropped her dumbbells. Now dumbbells is something which you use in the gym, so somebody had obviously dropped, so basically conveying a sense of sound in that sound. So a very visual, right, kind of an imagery is what Katherine Mansfield has managed to draw right in the first paragraph of that particular school. Now the contrast also of the kind of weather, right, the cold corridors, that is the reference is made talking about the weather outside there because it's late autumn, almost slipping into the winter months. So there is a sense of coldness which is there in the air, right? Now the reference to Muriel, now there is no reference to that later on in the story, so one assumes that possibly it could be Miss Meadows' first name. We do not know, at least there is no reference because constantly throughout the story she is referred to as Miss Meadows, right? Or possibly it could be someone having given that kind of a name to Miss Meadows, one of the students who may have just kind of called out aloud. There is no explanation given to that as far as this story is concerned. The science mistress stopped Miss Meadows. Good morning, she cried in a sweet, affected drawl. Isn't it cold? It might be winter. Now, it immediately, with those use of that word, sweet, affected, drawl, it kind of, you immediately an image of the teacher gets formed in your mind that she is someone who is not very she's a bit of an artificial, a bit of a fake, a bit of a put on kind of a person, because she speaks in an affected kind of a drawl, and she says, isn't it cold? It might be winter. That it could well be winter. That's how cold it is. Miss Meadows, hugging the knife, stared in hatred at the science mistress. Everything about her was sweet, pale like honey. You would not have been surprised to see a bee caught in the tangles of that yellow hair. Now, Miss Meadows hugging the knife, not a literal knife, but obviously she is kind of, it could be a reference to the baton, but it seems to be much more of a reference to the despair within her, which is why she's still, it's a different way of Katherine Mansfield actually pointing out the sadness that she's carrying inside her, which is why saying hugging the knife, that she's holding on to her feeling of sadness and despair. And it says that everything about the science mistress was very sweet, but at the same time very pale like honey, and in that yellow hair you could have been a honey bee. So it's just a sense of exaggeration out there. It's rather sharp, said Miss Meadows grimly. The other smiled her sugary smile. Grimness on part of Miss Meadows, the other one purely artificial, smiling in a very sugary kind of manner. You look frozen, said she. Her blue eyes opened wide. There came a mocking light in them. Had she noticed anything? So this is Miss Meadows talking to herself, which is why the use of the brackets out there. You look frozen. Now, it's obviously not a very charitable thing to say, right? That you look frozen. Basically to say that you look cold, you look sad, you look unfriendly, is what this science mistress is trying to say, while conveying that she is actually a very friendly kind and a very amiable kind of person. But Katherine Mansfield telling the readers that she is actually a very artificial, speaks in a very affected kind of drawl, right? So the bracket suggests that she is thinking to herself, and this whole thing is exaggeration that I referred to the yellow hair. And there is also a mocking light in them. The way she speaks, her blue eyes light up and there is a mocking sense in them. Oh, not quite as bad as that, said Miss Meadows, and she gave the science mistress, in exchange for her smile, a quick grimace and passed on. So she says, no, not so bad, she doesn't want to kind of engage in any kind of conversation with the science mistress. So the grimace is essentially an ugly, twisted expression on a person's face, and it basically conveys disgust. It could convey pain, or it could just convey a sense of sarcasm or just feeling some kind of amusement. Now, the body language of the teacher, if you note out there later on, is obviously she does not want to engage in any kind of conversation with the science mistress. Forms 4, 5 and 6 were assembled in the music hall. The noise was deafening. On the platform by the piano stood Mary Beasley, Miss Meadows' favorite, who played accompaniments. She was turning the music stool. When she saw Miss Meadows, she gave a loud warning, shh, shh, girls. And Miss Meadows, her hands thrust in her sleeves, the baton under her arm, strode down the center aisle, mounted the steps, turned sharply, seized the brass music stand, planted it in front of her, and gave her 2 sharp taps with her baton for silence. Tak, tak, basically indicating that she wanted silence. So she's not being very friendly that morning, right? Even though her favorite student is already there near the piano on the music stool, and she immediately says, ask the girls to quieten down because there was a lot of noise and din. Also, Miss Meadows' body language, if you see, right, her hands thrust in her sleeves, the baton under her arm, it kind of gives you a sense, the visual imagery gives you a sense of her body language not very friendly that morning. Silence please, immediately, and looking at nobody, her glance swept over that sea of colored flannel blouses with bobbing pink faces and hands, quivering butterfly hair bows and music books outspread. So she wants silence, and she looks at the whole scene. You will do well to actually remember some of this description that has been given out here. You could use that in your answers about the sea of colored flannel blouses with bobbing pink faces and hands, quivering butterfly hair bows and music books outspread, giving you a sense of the kind of sea of humanity out there inside that music hall out there, and it's also a reference to the color of the uniform of those students. She knew perfectly well what they were thinking. Medi is in a wax. Now, wax is obviously something which is sticky, and Medi is obviously a short form which the students may have given for Miss Meadows. Well, let them think it. Her eyelids quivered. She tossed her head, defying them. What could the thoughts of those creatures matter to someone who stood there bleeding to death, pierced to the heart by such a letter? These lines are very important. Please mark them. Use of the word creatures, it kind of conveys a certain sense of roughness on part of Miss Meadows when she's thinking of these students who otherwise would be sweet to her, right? And she says that those thoughts of those students, who she refers to as creatures, does not matter to someone who is bleeding to death. Who is bleeding to death? She is talking about herself. And why is she bleeding to death? Because of the letter that she had received, right? Quivered essentially means trembled. So now you can understand that she has received a letter which has left her bleeding, which has left her pierced, and the thoughts of those students does not matter at all to Miss Meadows. And now the letter is quoted. I feel more and more strongly that our marriage would be a mistake. Not that I do not love you, I love you as much as it is possible for me to love any woman. But truth to tell, I have come to the conclusion that I am not a marrying man, and the idea of settling down fills me with nothing but, and then the word disgust is what he had written, that it fills me with nothing but disgust. But as an afterthought, he had scratched it out, but scratched it out lightly and filled it with and replaced it with the word regret written on top. So he had written disgust first, but later on replaced it with the word regret. Okay, now this letter has been written by her fiancé Basil, okay, basically calling off the engagement and saying that he cannot get married to her. And the lines here are very important, and again something which you should quote in your answers, that it is, I love you as much as it is possible for me to love any woman, but truth to tell, I don't think I am a marrying man. And the idea of settling down, you know, these are quotes which you should use in your answer. Now, the fact that he had cut out the word disgust and replaced it with regret basically gives you an idea that he does not really want to be harsh to Miss Meadows. But the fact that he has cut it out in a very careless manner, it also shows what he actually thinks, that he does not care whether she actually sees the fact that he had actually meant to write disgust initially. So it kind of shows both. One is slightly sensitive side, that he does not want to hurt her, but at the same time the fact that she can read the first letter which was initially used also shows that he does not care beyond a point what she actually thinks. Basil, Miss Meadows stalked over to the piano. Now, stalk is not essentially the same as walking. Stalk has a slightly negative kind of connotation, and probably it has been used by Mansfield out here to kind of convey the kind of negative mood that Miss Meadows is in right then. And Mary Beasley, who was waiting for this moment, bent forward. Her curls fell over her cheeks while she breathed, "Good morning, Miss Meadows," and she motioned towards rather than handed over to her mistress a beautiful yellow chrysanthemum. This little ritual of the flower had been gone through for ages and ages, quite a term and a half. It was as much part of the lesson as opening the piano. But this morning, instead of taking it up, instead of tucking it into her belt while she leant over Mary and said, "Thank you, Mary, how very nice," turn to page 32. What was Mary's horror when Miss Meadows totally ignored the chrysanthemum, made no reply to her greeting, but said in a voice of ice. Page 14 please, and mark the accents well. Voice of ice. Please mark this phrase. Now, chrysanthemum is an important imagery in this particular story, and we'll come to it when we are discussing the themes later on. But it gives you a sense of what would be the usual routine, and that usual routine had been happening for a term and a half, okay, for a considerable period of time. But that morning, how Miss Meadows reacted to her favorite student was in stark contrast to how she would normally react, and even the student reacted with a sense of horror, because she was completely taken aback at the very unfriendly and voice of ice that with which Miss Meadows reacted to her. So, the handing over the flower chrysanthemum was as much a part of the entire music lesson ritual which would be conducted in school, right? Staggering moment. Mary blushed until the tears stood in her eyes. So that kind of body language and icy tone of Miss Meadows had an immediate effect on her favorite student, that she was almost standing there with tears in her eyes. But Miss Meadows was gone back to the music stand. She did not even notice that, the reaction to how she had actually spoken. Her voice rang through the music hall. Page 14, we'll begin with page 14, a lament. Now, the word lament is very important because it conveys mourning, it conveys sadness, and it is in sync with the sad and the very bad mood that she is in. So, in that sense, it is an appropriate song. She wants a song to reflect her state of mind and heart at that point in time as a result of the letter which has left her with a bleeding heart, bleeding to death. Now girls, you ought to know it by this time. We shall take it all together, not in parts, all together and without expression. Sing it though quite simply, beating time with the left hand. Now beating time with the left hand is almost like, giving a tal, helping you give a particular rhythm. Just like in Carnatic classical music, you do it with the right hand. Here you want it to be given with the left hand, right? She raised the baton, she tapped the music stand twice, down came Mary on the opening chord, down came all those left hands beating the air, and in chimed those young mournful voices, right? Now mournful voices, again referring to a very sad kind of song. Fast, too fast fade the roses of pleasure, soon autumn yields unto winter drear, fleety, fleetly, music's gay measure passes away from the listening ear. You could actually quote from this poem also, especially the first line and the last line. Fade the roses of pleasure. It's a sense of, when the roses are fading, it gives you a sense of the very solemn kind of mood. Passes away from the listening ear. Good heavens, what could be more tragic than that lament? Every note was a sigh, a sob, a groan of awful mournfulness. Miss Meadows lifted her arms in the white gown and began conducting with both hands. I feel more and more strongly that our marriage would be a mistake. She's constantly thinking of the lines in that particular letter that her fiancé had sent to her. Now, also you would see that this particular song, Autumn Yields into Winter Drear, basically it's also a song which is suiting Miss Meadows' mood at that point in time, because the music also passes away from the eager listening ear. So there is no music, autumn is passing on to winter, and especially in European countries, winter is largely symbolic of the end of the year. It's often symbolized or symbolic also of death. You would have read the poem by Robert Frost, also the Darkling Thrush, which is part of the ISC English Literature syllabus. You would see how winter is actually conveying a sense of ending, a sense of death, a sense of closure in that sense, right? But Miss Meadows' mind is not really on the lyrics of the poem. Even though she has asked them to sing from page 14 and not page 32, her mind is not really on the lyrics that much sharply, because her mind is constantly going to the contents of the letter that Basil had written to her, right? The words of the letter as well as the words of this song are both a lament, right? Because even Basil is actually lamenting that I feel more and more strongly that our marriage would be a mistake, right? So in that sense, the mistake of both that Basil is conveying and the mistake, the lament in the song, are both kind of interrelated, and that's something which you need to know, understand, and be able to include and analyze in your answers. Now, I feel more and more strongly that our marriage would be a mistake, she beat, and their voices cried, fleetly, fleetly. What could have possessed him to write such a letter? What could have led up to it? It came out of nothing. She was completely unprepared for what Basil had actually written to her, because she did not think it was something like this. His last letter had been all about a fumed oak bookcase he had bought for art books, and a natty little hall stand he had seen, a very neat affair with a carved owl on a bracket holding 3 hat brushes in its claws. How she had smiled at that. So like a man to think one needed 3 hat brushes, that is a brush to kind of brush the hat. From the listening ear sang the voices. So she's hearing the song, but her mind is focused on what was her relationship with Basil, and the fact that there was nothing which kind of led up to this moment where he had to write such a harsh letter of closure, right? Now, the 3 hat brushes also are an important pointer to Basil's personality, that he's very obsessed with his appearance, and that we will come to it just in a while, with his own appearance and about how he looked, and his whole fact of being self-obsessed. And that's an important aspect of his personality, because even when he is turning down the match with Miss Meadows, he's only thinking about himself. That I feel more and more strongly that our marriage would be a mistake. There's a lot of I in that letter which is written to Miss Meadows. Now, while she's talking and while she's thinking about Basil, it also conveys that she actually thought pretty well of Basil, right? So it was not a relationship in that sense of equals, and she almost felt happy and glad at the fact that Basil actually wanted to marry her, and we will come to the reason in a little while. Once again, said Miss Meadows, but this time in part, still without expression. Fast, too fast, with the gloom of the contraltos added, one could scarcely help shuddering. Fade the roses of pleasure. Last time he had come to see her, Basil had worn a rose in his buttonhole. How handsome he had looked in that bright blue suit with that dark red rose. It shows that she thought the world of Basil in terms of his looks, and he knew it too. He couldn't help knowing it. First he stroked his hair, then his moustache. His teeth gleamed when he smiled. So in that sense, obviously very conscious of his good looks. The headmaster's wife keeps on asking me to dinner. It's a perfect nuisance. I never get an evening to myself in that place. So obviously he's very conscious of the fact that there are women who are kind of chasing him, but he also fusses over it. An evening to myself is another indicator about his being very self-obsessed, fusses about it, also boasts about it. But can't you refuse? Oh well, it doesn't do for a man in my position to be unpopular. So at the same time, he doesn't want to refuse because he likes the attention that he gets as a result of his looks. Music's gay measure wailed the voices. The willow trees outside the high narrow windows waved in the wind. They had lost half their leaves, the tiny ones that clung, wriggled like fishes caught on a line. I'm not a marrying man. The voices were silent. The piano waited. So the song had ended, but she was still engrossed in her thoughts, which were not very happy. Now the willow trees that she is talking about. Now the students are obviously waiting for her instructions because the song has ended, but she wanted the lament to be loud. Now the willow trees, willow is something from where the bark of willow is also used for cricket bats, for those of you understand, and it says that the willow trees had actually lost half their leaves. It's the end of autumn, right? And the tiny ones that clung wriggled like fishes caught on a line. Now these fishes are also in a sense Miss Meadows, because they are also caught out there. She doesn't know how to get out of this very difficult situation, and we will know why she thinks she's caught like a fish. Quite good, said Miss Meadows, but still in such a strange stony tone that the younger girls began to feel positively frightened. Please mark this phrase. But now that we know it, we shall take it with expression, as much expression as you can put into it. Think of the words, girls. Use your imagination. Fast are too fast, cried Miss Meadows. That ought to break out a loud, strong forte, a lament. So she wants the lament to be loud. She almost wants the girls to kind of lament with her and give expression to her sense of grief at that point in time. And then in the second line, winter drear, make that drear sound as if a cold wind were blowing through it. So the coldness of the wind is what she wants to feel, and the girls to kind of articulate in that song, express in that song. Drear, said she so awfully that Mary Beasley on the music stool wriggled her spine. Now wriggled her spine is almost like a shiver passing through her spine. The third line should be one crescendo. Fleetly, fleetly music's gay measure, breaking on the first word of the last line, passes, and then on the word away, you must begin to die, to fade, until the listening ear is nothing more than a faint whisper. You can slow down as much as you like, almost on the last line now, please. So she's giving very detailed instructions because she wants the expressions to be an extension of her state of mind at that time. So she's giving very specific instructions. Crescendo essentially is reference to high pitch, and obviously she's lost in her own world, but she wants the girls to express her grief through that lament of a song. Again, the two light taps. She lifted her arms again, fast, too fast, and the idea of settling down fills me with nothing but disgust. Disgust was what he had written. That was as good as to say that their engagement was definitely broken off. So each and every word hitting Miss Meadows very, very sharply. Broken off, their engagement. People had been surprised enough that she had got engaged, right? The science mistress would not believe it first. Nobody had been as surprised as she. So there was a sense of disbelief even among people at the school that Miss Meadows had actually got engaged, and we will know about it in part 2, explanation video part 2. But essentially you can also get the sense of the fact that Miss Meadows does not think very highly of herself, right? And that's a problem area as far as Miss Meadows is concerned. And we will know about why is the reason why she does not have a very great opinion about herself. But right now at this point in time, she's almost like a terror to those young girls who are terribly, positively frightened as a result of the tone and tenor with which she's actually issuing all those instructions. So what I'll do is I'll pause here. In part 2, we will go through the rest of the story. I hope you have understood the story so far. In part 2, we'll go through the rest of the story and then discuss the larger themes of this story by Katherine Mansfield. Thank you very much for watching.